First of all, welcome to the September 14th meeting of the British Empire Study Group. We meet online and everyone is welcome. You do not have to be a member. If you want to be a member, that's fine. It's really expensive. It won't cost you anything. It's free. So there's really no need to join. Just show up to our meetings. That's fine. So for our next presentation, it will be October 12th. It's The Devil's Mail, Part 1, with Dr. Steve Berlin. That should be a really exciting show. We'll have a Part 2 because there are just so many ways you can destroy mail that we can't cover them in one 1 hour program. October 26th, we'll have the one and only George Holshauer and his son, hopefully. And that should be really interesting. George is also a character. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to my co-host here, Robert Lutens, to introduce tonight's speaker, Mr. Frederick Lawrence.
Thank you, Joan. Exhibiting is a wonderful way to share your ideas and research. A single frame exhibit is a great way to start exhibiting or to distill your multi-frame exhibit down to its essence. All collectors have budgets. Some are just a little larger than others, but regardless of your budget, Dr. Frederick P. Lawrence will provide guidance and pointers this evening for constructing or improving your single frame exhibit. A little background about our presenter. Our speaker is Dr. Frederick P. Lawrence, who lives in Gilbert, Arizona, in the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. Frederick, as a member of the Boy Scouts of America, began collecting stamps in 1960 by earning the Stamp Collecting Merit Badge while working towards his Eagle Scout rank. Through his experiences in the Boy Scouts, he soon gravitated to collecting scouts and scouting on stamps as a theme. In the mid-1970s, he narrowed his focus to collecting and researching the 3 earliest issues of Scouts and Scouting on stamps from the 1900 to the 1920 time period. His exhibits have won top awards at the national and international levels. He's an American Philatelic Society accredited chief judge and a Fédération Internationale de Philatélie accredited judge in the traditional class. He's a member of the American Philatelic Society, the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, Scouts on Stamp Society International in the United States, the Scout and Guide Stamp Club in the United Kingdom, the Anglo-Boer War Philatelic Society, the Philatelic Society for Greater Southern Africa, the Society for Czechoslovak Philately, and the Thailand Philatelic Society. He's written extensively for the publications of these groups since 1979 and is a frequent speaker at both national and international stamp shows. He holds a research doctorate in industrial engineering. So without further ado, I give you our presenter for this evening, Dr. Frederick P. Lawrence.
Thank you, Robert, for your more than generous introduction. And good afternoon or good evening, everyone, depending on your time zone. In this week's APS e-newsletter, you might have seen a link to a YouTube video harassing AI for a philatelic presentation presented by Don Denman, who is part of the Stamp Smarter Philatelic Learning Center. In this video, he shows how to use ChatGPT to generate a 10-slide PowerPoint presentation on the history of U.S. airmail services and the first U.S. airmail stamps and the stamps of the Graf Zeppelin airmail. And he does it all using AI resources in just under 15 minutes. Now, AI is a nascent technology, but it does show potential for considerably reducing the amount of time and effort necessary to prepare philatelic presentations, including webinars for our own British Empire Study Group. I've placed the links for the YouTube presentation and for Stamp Smarter on the slide, and I've asked Joan to post them in the chat so you can capture them if you want to look at these resources. Full disclosure, this presentation, Constructing an Award-Winning One-Frame Exhibit on a Budget, is my own personal work product, and no AI resources were utilized in its creation. Background of the presentation is that it was prepared earlier this year in support of the APS efforts to increase participation in exhibiting. It was shown at the Westpec Stamp Show in April and last month at the Great American Stamp Show. If you saw the presentation at either of those venues, it's only been nominally improved since then, so you might want to take a short coffee break and then come back for our social hour. So let's jump into our discussion. Here's an overview of the presentation. We'll start by chatting about why a one-frame exhibit, or OFE, and why a one-frame on a budget. Then I'll share with you a checklist for constructing a one-frame exhibit, including some discussion about each of the steps or tasks in the checklist. Then I'll share with you some comments about my own experience with my first and one and only, so far, one-frame exhibit. There is only one image of philatelic material in this deck of PowerPoint slides, but we as stamp collectors attend talks at stamp shows and participate in online webinars because we want to see, hear, and talk about philatelic material. So to atone for my error in not including more images in the PowerPoint slides, I'll offer a bonus feature of stepping through the images of the 16 pages of my one-frame exhibit. That will necessitate my switching out of PowerPoint and over to an image viewer. Joan and I practiced this yesterday, and it should go off without a hitch. But if we have technical issues, you know to whom to address your complaints. Then I'll return to the PowerPoint slides for comments and questions. So why a one-frame exhibit? If you've never exhibited, perhaps you have thought about or wanted to exhibit, but you've thought that exhibiting just seemed too intimidating, too challenging, particularly when you look at the award-winning multi-frame exhibits that you see at the national stamp shows that are part of the World Series of Philately, and particularly those that were in the Champion of Champions competition, for example, at Great American Stamp Show last month. So how could you start exhibiting if you've never done an exhibit before? Well, the American Topical Association has a virtual one-page exhibits activity that they conduct in conjunction with the Great American Stamp Show. It's only a single page, but it's a fun way to get your feet wet. And I believe Joan is putting a link in the chat to the ATA website. But most formal exhibiting, now formal exhibiting means at least at the regional level and above. So national exhibiting here in the US in the World Series of Philately shows and international exhibiting is currently structured on frames with 16 8.5 by 11-inch pages, or larger pages which occupy the same area as 16 standard size pages. So 16 standard size 8.5 by 11 pages is the minimum to buy in to formal exhibiting. So in a sense, a one-frame exhibit is one way, a good way, to start formal exhibiting. But why a one-frame exhibit on a budget? If you subscribe to Lynn's Stamp News, you may have seen this front page from the December 12th, 2022 issue. Headline, Jan Hofmeyer of Canada wins the Single Frame Champion of Champion Awards for his exhibit, quote, The Process That Led to Grill Stamps of the United States, From First Experiments to the Earliest Z Grills, unquote. Now, if you think assembling an exhibit of U.S. grills from the first through the Z grills is a challenging financial undertaking, you're probably right. Not all of us, in fact, I dare say few of us, can afford a one-frame exhibit of U.S. grills that would compete for the single-frame champion of champions. But if you want to construct a one-frame exhibit, how could you do that in an affordable way? How can you put together a one-frame exhibit on a budget? Here's how. Follow this relatively simple checklist for constructing a one-frame exhibit. We'll discuss each of the tasks or steps in the checklist on an individual slide in just a moment. But let's look at the steps or tasks in the checklist. Choose the topic. Research the topic. Plan your one-frame exhibit. Establish a budget. Ooh, budgeting. Acquire material. Make pages and mount material. Lay the groundwork to show your one-frame exhibit competitively, locally, regionally, nationally, even nowadays also internationally. And after you show your exhibit, pay attention to what I call the 4 R's: review, respond, revise, and reapply. Let's look at each of the steps or tasks one at a time. Choose the topic. Choose something you're interested in. It might be an individual stamp or perhaps a stamp issue, but be careful because you only have 16 pages, and a stamp issue with more than one stamp may require a multi-frame exhibit to cover the issue thoroughly. Or it might be a proof or proofs, or an error or errors, or more commonly these days, usages or covers of an individual stamp or perhaps a stamp issue. Or you could choose a story to tell, a story that you want to tell philately, illustrating the story with philatelic material. Be careful to narrow the subject. Be sure that the subject can be well covered in 16 pages without leaving anything out. Now, having said that, at the same time, be open to serendipity. Every once in a while, something may fall into your lap, which shouts out to you, hey, I'm a good candidate for a one-frame exhibit. Don't let that opportunity pass you by. Or in the words of the old adage, never look a gift horse in the mouth. Then research the topic, a subject near and dear to myself as a former academic. There's a lot of information about stamps and covers. Published sources include catalogs, books, both general books and specialized books on individual issues or topics, stamp newspapers, stamp magazines, particularly club and society publications. So the specialized societies that have bulletins and journals, and some even e-newsletters these days, like the APS weekly e-newsletter. There's a lot of information available online through browsers such as Google, Startpage, Bing, just to mention a few. Then there's Google Scholar, if you're not familiar with Google Scholar, it's something like an academic Google. To reach it, just search in Google for Google Scholar, and Google will take you to Google Scholar, which has its own internal search function. You'll basically find there academic journals and books. So looking for information about the historical background, let's say, of a story that you want to tell with philatelic material is available through Google Scholar. Then there's Wikipedia, which is not a peer-reviewed source, but generally speaking is a pretty good source for general knowledge information. And if you've looked at Wikipedia, you're familiar with the announcements that appear periodically asking for people to review various articles and to update them or to verify the information. Stamp clubs and stamp societies have websites with additional information, in addition to quite often access to the back copies of their bulletins, journals, and newsletters. And don't forget the philatelic libraries. The Global Philatelic Network, now the Global Philatelic Library, previously the Union Catalog or Union Library, is now available through the American Philatelic Research Library, which is available from the American Philatelic website. So just go to the APS website, stamps.org, click into the American Research Philatelic Library, and you'll be able to access the Global Philatelic Network. In addition, there are some fee-based services available. If you'd like a copy of a couple of pages from a book or a journal article, you can obtain that through the APRL, usually just for a nominal cost for a paper or for a digital copy of that material. Some of the major libraries, including our own APRL, will offer fee-based research services. You can rent a research librarian by the hour who will dig deeply into a topic of interest to you and probably find some resources that you didn't even know existed. There are also, outside of the libraries, fee-based services available. If you're interested in taking advantage of such a service, look in the Philatelic Exhibitor, TPE, which is the quarterly publication of the AAPE, the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, for advertisements about businesses that provide these services. They're very similar to the services that are advertised by the businesses, which will create exhibit pages and mount your material on those pages, saving you the trouble of dealing with software and computers. Although not an endorsement of any particular service, just as an example, in the most recent issue of TPE, there is an advertisement for Fraser's in Woodstock, New York. Fraser's is Dr. Colin Fraser and his wife Pamela Kafetz Fraser, and they do offer these services for a fee. Next step or task is to plan your one-frame exhibit. Lay out the 16 pages. Now, if you're about my age, I'm 76, you may still prefer paper as I do. I sketch out what's going to be on each page of the exhibit on a piece of scrap or junk paper, and then I lay them out 4 by 4, either on a table or usually on the floor of my stamp room, or if the stamp room is too cluttered, on the floor of the living room or the dining room, much to my wife's distress. But of course, you can do this also in a computer if you're a bit more tech savvy than I am. Pay attention to how to start and stop your exhibit. The title page is always on the first page. And I'll talk a little more about the title page when I show you the title page to my one-frame exhibit. and the epilogue is on the last page, either half of the last page or perhaps the whole last page, depending on the size of the philatelic material that's on the page. So that means that you effectively have just 14 pages, numbers 2 through 15, in which to develop the storyline. Then match the philatelic material to parts of the story that appear on each page of the exhibit. The philatelic material that you have, if any, and hopefully you have some, if not most of what you would need for the exhibit, and then identify what else you need that you don't have that you need to acquire in order to fill in the gaps. Next is establish a budget. This is a difficult step or task for many of us. I like to think of it as constructing a monetary lockbox around the topic or the subject. In a sense, it is the maximum amount of money that you are willing to commit to acquire the material that you don't already have for the exhibit. If you've got almost all the material, then your lockbox may be small and your budget may be low. But if you need something, you'll have to go out and acquire it. But if the lockbox is too expensive, before proceeding, revisit the topic or subject of the exhibit. You could downscale or rescale your expectations for your exhibit of the topic. So that's not the topic, but it's your expectations of what you want the topic and the exhibit to do for you. In that process, you may end up refining, tweaking, or even changing the topic or subject. But when it comes to budgeting for any exhibit, the general rule is that modern material is less expensive. So a one-frame exhibit on a budget, think about a modern issue or using modern material that will keep the cost of the exhibit down. And don't buy material without a realistic financial plan. Gee, it's fun to look through dealer stocks, look through cover boxes, look through auction catalogs, and espy material that we like. Oh, it's just so attractive. I'd like to have that in my collection. But if it doesn't fit into one of your exhibits or a plan for one of your exhibits, think carefully about whether you want to spend some of your stamp budget on that material. Now, having said all of this, be prepared to update your budget in real time. Every once in a while, must-have material will surface. You see it and it screams out at you, you must have me for your exhibit. It may or may not be within your current budget. If it's as good as it purports to be, think seriously about, and generally speaking, we do, in fact, go ahead and update our budget in real time in order to acquire that must-have material. So acquiring material, where does material come from? Well, we're all familiar with the sources of philatelic material. Many of us buy material, philatelic material, from dealers, from auctions, and from club or society auctions and sales circuits. Now, in the auction category, there are the big houses like Harmer's International, big plug there for someone who will remain anonymous, as well as online auctions, particularly eBay, Delcamp, and Hipstamp. So if you're looking for modern material, that's where most of the modern material is today. And you can also buy and trade from other collectors if you're fortunate enough to know someone or to locate someone who has material that you would like to have in your one-frame exhibit. For modern issue exhibits, Generally speaking, that is someone whom you would meet through a specialist society, a society where there are collectors either of that particular subject, like the Anglo-Boer War Philatelic Society, if you're interested in Boer War material, or the Czechoslovak Society, if you're interested in collecting Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, or Slovakia material. Next step or task is to make pages and mount material. Software abounds these days. There's a lot of off-the-shelf software. You could use Microsoft Word, Microsoft Publisher, Adobe InDesign, which is the new name for what used to be Adobe PageMaker, as I was reminded by someone in the audience at Great American Stamp Show just last month. And there are software products that are specially designed for album pages and for exhibits. There's a column in Lynn's Weekly Stamp News written by a fellow named Sharp, I believe, or Sharp with an E, so Sharp or Sharpie, that deals with software and computers in philately, and he periodically reviews new software products for album pages and for exhibits. So take a look at his back columns for some suggestions of commercial software products that are available for exhibits. I use Microsoft Publisher. It's a Microsoft product, so it's a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, and it's fairly capable, and it is part of Microsoft Office, which is today Office 365. So if you have one of those suites, you have Microsoft Word and Microsoft Publisher. You just have to go looking for it. It may not show up on your start menu. Rummage around inside your Microsoft Office or your Office 365 software, and you should find it. Write the text for the exhibit. Now today, the convention in exhibiting seems to be to have two types of text in an exhibit: a narrative text, which advances the storyline, and philatelic text, which describes the material and shows off your philatelic knowledge. The two types of text come from the thematic exhibiting arena. And when thematic exhibiting was its own class of exhibits before the exhibiting classes were updated a few years ago, the thematic exhibits required that the text be differentiated as narrative and philatelic. Today, many exhibitors use different fonts or typefaces to distinguish between these two types of text, and I'll show you an example in my own exhibit in a little later. Be sure to highlight the key content. You can do this using matting, colored matting, or borders around the key material, and either physically, that is, use colored paper as matting, or you can do it in the computer. Either produce a colored background or produce a border within the software. You can do all of that within Microsoft Publisher, and I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. If you have original research, be sure to use a symbol to designate original research. Put that symbol on the title page in your legend area so that everyone can recognize where your original research appears. And be sure to describe your original research in the synopsis, which you provide through the exhibit's chairperson to the judges in advance of showing your exhibit, so that the judges know what it is for which you are claiming original research material. You can include discussion of original research material on a title page, and we'll speak to that a little later when I show you my own exhibit. Be sure to use archival materials, acid-free paper, readily available from most paper sources, printing outfits, printing companies, printing businesses can provide, or they can order for you acid-free paper in different paper weights or strengths and different colors. So pretty easy to come by. And also be sure to use stamp mounts, including cover corners and page protectors that are made of inert material. So that's a plastic material that will not interact with stamps and covers. There are a number of sources of this type of material. And again, look for advertisements in the philatelic exhibitor. I'll mention just one. I use Atlantic protective pouches as a source for both stamp mounts and cover corners and page protectors. Atlantic protective pouches does offer 3 styles of page protectors: top loading, side loading, and what they call a capital L page protector that opens on both the top and one side to make it easy to insert exhibit pages into the protector. And then there's a plastic flap or tab that snaps behind the exhibit page to secure it within the protector. I think they're the only source of archival page protectors for stamp exhibits which has this feature. Next step or task is to lay the groundwork to show your one-frame exhibit competitively. Before you move too quickly into the development of your own one-frame exhibit, look at some award-winning one-frame exhibits to see how other people have handled similar topics. There are files of exhibits on the AAPE website, on the Exponet website that's hosted out of a gentleman in the Czech Republic today, but just Google Exponet and you can see where to go to the Exponet site. And then some club and society websites also have archives of exhibits. Take a look again at previous exhibits, particularly those that have done well competitively, to get good ideas about how to develop your own exhibit. Then research the shows. Which shows accept one-frame exhibits? Now, currently, all of the World Series of Philately shows, the national level stamp shows, accept one-frame exhibits, but local and regional shows may or may not. So if you intend to start an exhibit at a local or regional show and move it up, be sure that you check, does that show accept one-frame exhibits? And what are the frame fees? And be prepared to pay a little more for a one-frame exhibit than the per-page frame fee for a multi-frame exhibit. That's because the shows want to capture an administrative charge for handling your exhibit application, even though it's only one frame, and they would only earn that one frame fee if they charged you the same frame fee as for a multi-frame exhibit. Then, who will be the judges? Research the judges carefully. Who knows your topic? There's good news and bad news there. The good news is, if a judge is familiar with your topic, he will know what the strengths and the weaknesses of your exhibit are. The bad news is, he will know what the strengths and the weaknesses of your exhibit are. So if someone on the jury is knowledgeable about your topic, you can expect that he will work with the other members of the jury to ensure that there is the fairest evaluation of the material in your exhibit. Equally important is who among the judges has a reputation for strong critiques. So here we're talking about both one-on-one critiques with exhibitors at the frames. Almost all the national level shows schedule one-on-one critiques with exhibitors at the frames. But if you're not able to attend a show, you will receive an EEF, an exhibit evaluation form from a national level or World Series of Philately show with written comments about all of the criteria that are used to evaluate competitive exhibits. Finally, who has experience with one-frame exhibits? Who of the judges has experience with one-frame exhibits? Today, all judges are trained to judge all classes of exhibits. So traditional, postal history, aero and astrophilately, thematic, revenues, and the newer categories, picture postcards, Cinderellas, and one-frame exhibits. However, if you look at the list of judges on the APS website, you will see that some judges have one-frame exhibits listed among their areas of specialization, such as I do. These are legacy designations, and they identify those of us who were accredited before the one-frame exhibits were accepted into exhibiting at the U.S. national level. At that time, which was in the early 90s, those of us who were judging went through special, rigorous training to learn how to judge one-frame exhibits. All the judges today have had that same training. Those of us who are in the legacy group have just been judging one-frame exhibits longer than anybody else. So we can lay claim to having more experience judging one-frame exhibits than those judges who were accredited after one-frame exhibits were accepted at the national level. The whole idea here is to strategize where and when would be the best show to show your one-frame exhibit. After the show, pay attention to these 4 R's. Review the judge's comments. They could come from what is called the feedback forum today, used to be called the jury critique. Exhibitors sit in the room, judges sit at a table at the front, and the judges pontificate. Yeah. But if you're at the show, be sure to arrange for a one-on-one critique at the frame with a designated first responder. One of the judges will be designated as the first responder. If you ask about your exhibit at the feedback forum, he or she is the judge who will respond. In preparation, each of the judges has carefully researched those exhibits for which he or she is designated as a first responder and will be prepared to engage you in depth about your exhibit. If you're not there, you will receive the exhibit evaluation form, or EEF, when your exhibit comes back. There'll be written comments about all of the evaluation criteria that are used to evaluate exhibits, and the name and the email address and sometimes a contact phone number of the first responder will be on the form, so you can contact him or her if you have follow-up questions about the comments that the judge has offered. Once you have the comments in hand, respond to the comments. As an active judge today, I can tell you that the majority of comments to exhibitors fall into one of 3 areas. The first is development of the story. That's the treatment category on the EEF. So how well is the story that you wanted to tell and illustrate with philatelic material developed or presented? The second area is the philatelic material that appears in the exhibit. Considerations are the choice of the material that you show, the rarity and difficulty of acquisition of that material, and its condition. Rarity and difficulty of acquisition are not the same. There are lengthy discussions of these 2 criteria that have appeared in the TPE. So if you're interested in what is rarity versus what is difficulty of acquisition, take a look at some of the recent issues there and read those discussions. Or give me a holler and I'd be pleased to chat with you about it. The third area is highlighting the key content or key material. So that's calling out the key material, the significant items, again, using matting or borders, and identifying your personal study and research, again, through comments in the synopsis that you send to the jury in advance of the show, and using some symbol to designate personal study and research on the exhibit. Then revise your exhibit. Respond to the comments, make changes to incorporate your responses to the comments. Do what things have been suggested to you. Now, just because you receive a comment from one judge or from one jury at a feedback forum, and that doesn't mean you should immediately run out and make that change to your exhibit. But if you receive the same comment from 2 or 3 first responders or 2 or 3 juries in a feedback forum, that probably means that the comment is well formed, that it's not just the opinions of the usually 5 members on a particular jury, but rather it reflects an appropriate appraisal of the strengths and weaknesses of your current exhibit. If you hear it over and over again, it's probably something you need to address. Then finally, the most important of the 4 R's perhaps is to keep going. Reapply for frames after you have reviewed, responded, and revised your exhibit. Show it again at a follow-on show or shows. Keep plugging until the exhibit achieves your personal objectives. Now I'd like to share with you my own experience with my one and only, so far, one frame exhibit. I am a collector of Scouts and Scouting on stamps, as Robert mentioned. So I spend time at stamp shows digging through cover boxes, looking for covers associated with Scouts and Scouting on stamps. I found this cover in a dealer box at CPAX in 2015. Among the stamps is a 1982 miniature sheet with 2 stamps you see on the left for the 75th anniversary of Scouting that took place in 1982, and that was also the 120th anniversary year of the birth of Lord Robert Baden-Powell, shown on the right-hand stamp, who was the founder of World Scouting. This cover looked really attractive to me. It sort of jumped out of the box at me, hit me in the face, and said, hey, you know, I could be the start of a one-frame exhibit. And since it was so inexpensive, I bought it. Now, miniature sheets and souvenir sheets are good candidates for one-frame exhibits. Why? Because they're modern topical issues and correspondingly they're relatively inexpensive. Now, what we're talking about here are those miniature sheets and souvenir sheets that are issued by those countries that produce quite a few stamps just for collectors. So these are some countries in Africa, some Caribbean islands, and a few islands in the South Pacific that are prolific issuers of stamps for collectors. This particular miniature sheet had limited usage. The 2 stamps that you saw on that sheet only appeared in the miniature sheet. They were not issued separately in sheets or panes of stamps. And they were only on sale at the post office for 16 months. So my initial thought that the miniature sheet might be a good candidate for a one-frame exhibit proved true. And one thing led to another, and it took a little over 4 years to acquire enough material to fill 16 pages and launch a one-frame exhibit. Now, I live, as Robert mentioned, in Gilbert, Arizona, in the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. And at that time, we had a national stamp show here that was part of the World Series of Philately, Arapex. And as a supporter of Arapex, I tried to put in at least one exhibit every year. I showed the one frame exhibit for the first time at Arapex in 2020. It garnered 74 points and a large silver. There was no Arapex in 2021 because of the COVID outbreak. Then in 2022, it moved up 2 points to 76 and a vermeil. Unfortunately, after the 2022 show, the APS suspended Arapex from the World Series of Philately because of show management issues. There were no competitive exhibits at Arapex earlier this year. Then at Great American Stamp Show last month, Arapex was decertified as a national level show. Whether there will be a national level show in Phoenix at any time in the future is, at this point, not determined. Nonetheless, I continue to work on this exhibit with the hope that I'll be able to improve it. Usages are, as you might suspect, difficult to come by, i.e., really scarcer than hen's teeth, because it is a modern topical issue. It's a miniature sheet, not something that was used extensively for commercial mailing. And just to keep myself working on the exhibit, I have applied for frames at the San Diego Stamp Show next February. Now, as I mentioned, I'd like to share with you the images of my one frame exhibit. So I am going to switch out of the PowerPoint slide deck. Now, this worked yesterday.
I think you have to stop this screen share.
Yes, I do. And there we go. All right.
So,
Now, I hope that you're now seeing the image of the title page of my one frame exhibit. So again, this is an exhibit of that Brazil 1982 miniature sheet with 2 stamps. So following the current convention for exhibit title pages, I have sections on purpose and composition, background, scope and importance, and I have a section on original research. Speak about that in a moment. Then there's the exhibit plan, and finally, the legend for the exhibit. Now, purpose and composition could have been separate sections, and you do see them separately on title pages. And likewise, scope and importance could have been separate sections as well. But I use up some real estate with a piece of philatelic material on the title page, and so I had to compress in order to make everything fit. So the exhibit plan shows the major sections of the exhibit, and these are the section headers that appear in the upper left-hand corner of the exhibit pages. Then in the upper right-hand corner, there are subtitles that describe the material on each of the individual exhibit pages. And the legend shows the 2 types of text in the exhibit, the narrative and philatelic texts. And as you can see, I use 2 different typefaces. These are readily available in almost all of the software that is available for making exhibit pages. The challenging or significant items are marked with a red border. I just do that with the computer. Just draw a box around the item and color it red. And I designate the original research with a mortarboard. once an academic, always an academic. Now, on the title page is a piece of philatelic material. The Post and Telegraph Corporation that runs the post office in Brazil retains all design, production, pre-production, and production material for stamp issues. So there is no traditional design, pre-production, or production material in private hands that could be included in exhibits of modern Brazil stamps, except for copies of photo essays, which are released by the Post and Telegraph Corporation to the press in advance of new stamp issues. These are technically truly essays because the denomination is not included. Notice it shows as all zeros. Brazil went through a period of hyperinflation in the 1980s. Postal rates changed every few months, and correspondingly, the Post and Telegraph Department did not set the denomination for new stamps until right before they were printed and released. And often those issues were behind the postal rates in effect when the stamps came out. Now, I include, as you see, a paragraph that describes the original research that I've done on this issue. It's difficult to do original research on a modern issue, so you may or may not have original research to include in your synopsis. But if you do, think about including a description of that original research on the title page. It ends up that the original research appears on the next page of the exhibit, page 2. And so I like to put this description here so that when someone looks at the first real page of the exhibit, page 2, and sees the mortarboard indicating original research, they can quickly look back here on the title page to understand why I have called out credit for original research. So here is the second page, and the original research is associated with the image of Lord Baden-Powell that appears on the right-hand stamp in the miniature sheet and in the cachet for the official first day cover. Brazil is like Canada in that it produces an official first day cover for collectors. What was not known at the time that the postal announcement came out for this miniature sheet in 1982 was where the photograph came from that was used in the design of the stamp. The stamp was designed by Lucia T.V. Ramos, who was a graphic designer who designed a number of stamps for Brazil in the 1970s and into the 80s. And quite interestingly, she also served a tour as the chief commissioner of the Brazil Girl Scout Association. So she was intimately involved with scouting throughout her life. It turns out that she used a photograph taken in 1929 at the Gilwell Park Campsite and Activity Center in the UK of Baden-Powell. 1929 was a jamboree year as well. That photograph appears on a number of RPPCs, real photo postcards, and I show here a card with the original photograph on the left, and then a card where the publisher has put in the background behind Baden-Powell, and that is the image that was used in the cachet for the first day cover. These postcards are quite popular, particularly in the UK. They're the most expensive items in the exhibit. Well, only a few dollars, they are the most expensive pieces And so they might have rated a red border just because of the cost, but they're here because they tell the story of how the designer developed the image of Baden-Powell on the stamps and the official first day covers. Right? The announcement of new stamp issues is through what is called an edital. That's the Portuguese word for postal announcement. This is a 4-page folder that's put out by the Brazilian Post and Telegraph Corporation. That's ECT in Portuguese. On the first page is an image of the stamp issue, sometimes in black and white and sometimes in color. We see it here in color, and of course a line through it to indicate that those are not postally valid images. And then there is also an image of the hand stamp for the first day of issue. Most of the modern issues of Brazil come out of Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, the modern city that was built from scratch a few years ago to be the capital city. The post office sells the editals with the stamp issues, or in this case, the miniature sheet affixed over the image on the edital and canceled on the first day. Now, in Brazil, the stamp issues come out across the nation on the first day of issue, and there are first day of issue cancels in every regional directory. You can kind of think of that like states. The regions in Brazil are administrative or governmental entities similar to our 50 states here in the US. And there is a cancellation for each of the regional directories. Here we see both the official cancel and the cancel for Brasilia. Here are a couple of the official first day covers. And in Brazil, the official first day covers can be remailed for the value of the postage on the cover. So if you buy a first day cover from the Post and Telegraph Department, you can then remail it and claim the value of the stamps, or in this case, the miniature sheet that is on the first day cover. So the bottom cover, which is marked impresso, that's for a printed matter, it has been mailed to a collector in Belgium. And it turns out that the postage, the 270 CR dollar sign, that's Cruzeiros, the currency in effect in 1982, it's different today, covered the postage for international airmail, the printed matter rate, and the registration. Remember the name of the collector here, Paco Raymond. We'll see that again in a few pages. And as I mentioned, the first day covers were generated at all of the regional directories. Here are a couple of the larger cities in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. But again, there were first day covers generated from all of the regional directories. I have about 30 or so different covers from the different regional directories. Private caches are allowed, unlike in Canada, where there is no competition these days. The top is a cover by Philatelica, or FIL. You see in the lower right-hand corner of the cachet. And notice that it says 22/82. You might recall that the editorial or postal announcement said issue number 22 for the year 82, and that's being reflected here in the cachet. The lower cover has a cachet with an image of the stamp design for the Baden-Powell stamp on the right. And that was authorized by the stamp designer, again, Lucia TV Ramos. And you'll notice that the cover has both a registration label and the registration number written out as an R with the numeral. And that's because the adhesive on the registration labels was so poor that they often fell off in transit. So it was not unusual to see the number written in to make certain that the receiving post office would know that the item was registered. DH is a hand stamp that stands for de Havilland. It's left over from the early airmail period. The first airmail flights in Brazil were on de Havilland planes, and DH was an airmail hand stamp to indicate airmail service. Some post offices in Brazil still today mark airmail with a DH. Here's that announcement folder again with a special event cancel. Homeland Week is sort of like our 4th of July. And you can see that someone removed a stamp from the miniature sheet, cut it apart, and put it back together, I think so that the Homeland Week cancel could clearly be seen. Why it's on the editorial, I don't know, but it's an interesting special event usage of a part of a souvenir sheet or miniature sheet. Brasilia 83 was an FIP International Philatelic Exhibition held in Rio in 1983. It had special cancels for each day of the show, and one of those days was Thematic Philately Day. We see here the cancel for Thematic Philately Day, which shows Baden-Powell blowing a kudu horn. That's a horn from a kudu, an antelope-like animal from Africa. The bottom cover shows that the envelope that was used, which says first day of issue, wasn't. Rather, that was left over from the issuance of a souvenir sheet about 6 months before, in December the year before, advertising the upcoming FIP International Philatelic Exhibition. Judges have commented that they don't like that cover, and I have to agree with them. But at the time, I didn't have anything else to put on that page. I now have some additional material. Usages follow next, and here is the cover that launched the exhibit. It has 390 cruzeros. It should have had 400. It's 10 cruzeros short, but it was not taxed. It looked to me initially to be a commercial usage, but then I found out that the addressee was not only a stamp collector, a stamp dealer, and a cachet maker, but he was a collector of Scouts and Scouting on stamps, and he belonged to our collecting society in Canada. I did not know him at the time. Here's another example of a registered usage to the U.S., clearly philatelic in nature, addressed to Jerome Husak, who was the executive director of the American Topical Association at that time. And notice the interesting registered in Portuguese hand stamp in addition to the registration label. Here's a pair of covers that were addressed to our friend Paco Raymond from Interfila, which is a commercial activity that provides a cover service to collectors. The top cover is properly rated, but the bottom cover is overpaid by 200 cruzeros. My best thinking here is that when the covers were made up, they failed to note that the two stamps in the miniature sheet had different values. The Baden-Powell stamp is 85 cruzeros, whereas the Boy Scout stamp is 185 cruzeros. And they ended up putting too much postage on the second cover. Here are covers to East Germany and West Germany. At the time, Germany was still divided, with stamps taken from miniature sheets. Now notice these envelopes have RPC in the lower left-hand corner. That stands for Portuguese, essentially envelope recommended by or envelope endorsed by the Post and Telegraph Corporation. So if you made envelopes that conform to the sizes, and in this case, the airmail logages or marking, you could identify the envelope as complying by printing RPC in the lower left-hand corner. While most of the usages are philatelic in nature, the miniature sheets, we think, were sometimes broken up so that postal clerks could use up the stocks of these miniature sheets for postage on higher value mailings like parcels. So here's a large envelope, apparently not philatelically inspired, sent to Denmark, where the two stamps have been taken out of two miniature sheets and used to make up the postage. One of the interesting pieces here is this padded envelope addressed to probably a stamp collector in Czechoslovakia. It has a green customs label on the back, which says in Portuguese, contains used stamps. The gift value is SVC. I don't know what that means, and I'm hoping a collector of Brazil can tell me what the Portuguese is for SVC. I suspect it means no cash value. At the bottom is a postal card that was sent from Rio late in 1982. It was sent by a gentleman who was both a Scout stamp collector, a dealer, and the editor of the Journal of the Scout Society for a while, and sent to the wife of a well-known Scouts collector the interesting message, "Dear Nancy, make Dave pay for this card." It is a card with a picture of a Brazilian scout that came from a series of cards issued by the Boy Scouts of America. I particularly like it because Dave and Nancy Kitts were at that time living in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, where I was born, in fact, just a short distance from the hospital where I was born there in 1947. And this is the epilogue. 2 years later, Brazil issued another miniature sheet for the 65th anniversary of the Brazilian Girl Scout Federation, again designed by Lucia TV Ramos. Note that the postage is now 585 cruzeiros, but at the time that the sheet was used on commercial correspondence, it only paid for about 56% of the inflated postage needed, and additional stamps had to be applied to make up the franking. And that brings us to my favorite slide in the deck of PowerPoint slides, where I turn it over to you for your comments and questions about what we've talked about tonight. If you'd like to keep in contact with me, my email address and phone and fax number are on the slide, and I've asked Joan to include my email address in the chat so you can capture it there. Please do not hesitate to reach out for me if you have any questions about or interest in one-frame exhibiting and or multi-frame exhibiting. I'd love to continue a conversation with you. Thanks so much, everyone, for participating in our webinar this afternoon. And now back to Joan for our social time.
Well, thank you very much, Frederick. That was really very, very informative. Right now, I am going to start bringing people over. Well, Robert there's a lot of there's 7 questions already in the chat. I am going to ask anyone who is a judge who's sitting out there in the audience to please raise your hand. Don't be shy. We'd love to bring you over to share your knowledge. Experienced collectors, exhibitors, please also join us first. So Robert, over to you with the questions.
Thank you so much, Joan. That was great, Frederick. Thank you so much. From Francois Deschamps, does modern exhibit have less chance of winning than a more expensive exhibit of rare stamps?
In terms of less chance of winning, no. Exhibits are judged following the criteria in the Manual of Philatelic Judging. You can download that from the APS website. And the criteria for judging, which are reflected in the EEF, the exhibit evaluation form, are scrupulously but consistently applied across all exhibits. So there's no reason that an exhibit of more modern material that is well done cannot win top awards. And there are indeed some one-frame exhibits that have done extremely well in terms of their awards, which are based on either storylines that are exhibited with inexpensive philatelic material or which focus on an individual issue. I would someday hope that my exhibit would move up a bit in the competition, but to be realistic, the rarity and degree of difficulty factors make that a challenge. The material is difficult to acquire, but it doesn't have high rarity. And as a consequence, it's never going to score high points in that particular evaluation category. But that's something the exhibitor accepts going into the construction and showing a particular exhibit. There is effectively a ceiling on any exhibit, and that reflects the material that's in the exhibit as well as how well the material is presented, how well a storyline involving that material is developed or treated.
All right. Francois had a second part to her question. Do you need to be a part of a stamp club to exhibit?
Short answer is no. Exhibiting at shows, except perhaps for local or club shows, generally open to anyone and everyone. Regional and national level stamp shows, anyone can apply for frames. Usually, the preference is given to, in the case if exhibits are oversubscribed, may be given to members of the American Philatelic Society or members of a specialty society which may be holding a national convention or meeting at that particular show, in order to ensure that the members of that society who have exhibits are able to show those exhibits at that national meeting or convention.
All right. From an anonymous attendee, can you register a title of an exhibit so someone else cannot use it? And are the titles protected by copyright?
To the best of my knowledge, the answers are no to both of those questions. Now, let me take advantage of that question to answer a question that wasn't asked, but I think is an interesting one nonetheless for folks to think about. If you have an exhibit, would you want to make your exhibit available to the public? So would you want your exhibit to appear, for example, in the set of exhibits on the AAPE website, or the exhibits that appear on the Exponet website in Europe, or on the exhibits that appear on the website of a specialist society to which you may be a member? There are positives and negatives to that question. My own personal position is that I have not made my competitive exhibits available to the public because I have both material that I don't want people to know I have unless they actually see the exhibit. And so go to a show where the exhibit is and look at the real material. And I have the results of many years of original research reflected in the exhibit. And that research material, those research results, are not copyright protected. So it's not like an academic publication where original research can be protected under copyright laws. However, one might wish to make one's exhibit available to the public in order to advertise your collecting interests, to attract people to come to shows to see the exhibit, to contact you, to exchange information about the material in your exhibit. So there are pros and cons to both sides.
Mm-hmm. Okay, from John Fitzpatrick, to what extent are ephemera related to the topic of the frame, but not postally allowed?
Now, today, we meaning the exhibiting and judging community, and particularly exhibiting at the national level, as is controlled by the American Philatelic Society, take a very liberal and view of the inclusion of ephemeral material. If the material advances the story, if it's effective in how you treat the story, that material is welcomed. It used to be that type of material was only seen in Cinderella type exhibits, or maybe the old special studies class, which no longer exists. But yes, you see everything and anything. The more related that it is to the actual stamps or covers, the better the association and the greater the leverage that material will do for your exhibit in terms of its evaluation. Just like those RPPCs that I show on the second page of my one frame. They're intimately tied to the stamp design and the official cachet, the cachet of the official first day covers. And yet they're not postally used. Those are just mint postcards.
Okay, we've got a layout question here from Jerry Petrowski. Did you get any negative feedback on the vertically mounted covers?
Yes and no. It all depends on one's sort of personal preference. Now, in my early exhibits, so in my multi-frame exhibits that I competed nationally and internationally, I have a few of those legal size envelopes, and I put them diagonally on the page, and I put the text in a box that looks like a trapezoid. So the text sort of stair steps around the covers. And I thought about doing that here, but I didn't, just because of the challenge of putting the item, the text, and the images of the cancels on the back of the cover all on the same page. I sort of jinked around with that, and I couldn't get it to look halfway decent. Now, alternatively, one could go to, say, double pages, the 11 by 17. Now, that requires an infrastructure upgrade. So you have to have a printer that will print 11 by 17 pages, or you take it to Kinko's or Staples and have them printed there. You have to have paper that is cut to that size. That generally means buying larger pieces and having them cut down by a paper supplier into 11 by 17. And you have to have page protectors that are 11 by 17, and they're not inexpensive. So there's a cost associated with moving to, say, double pages, or even now doing something like putting the entire exhibit on one page, which has been done. But clearly there's not a single frame page protector that's handled a different way. You may have seen an exhibit of that. It comes in a roll, and the exhibitor tacks it at the top of the frame and then unrolls it and tacks it at the bottom. But that's just the background. That's just the text. And then you stick all the philatelic material onto that unrolled sheet with double stick tape. Not something that I'd like to do, but it has been done.
All right. Question from Lad Fashold. For modern material, usages are, as you say, rarer than hen's teeth. How
Yes.
can one share this with the judges? And what if no usages are known?
Will you share information with the judges through the synopsis, which is typically a two-page, so front and back of one piece of paper or front of two sheets of paper that you send to the judges through the exhibit chairman. Nowadays, most exhibit chairpersons, exhibit chairmen, request a copy of your title page and a synopsis page to send to the judges, and the judges use it to prepare for judging, particularly the first responders. So you can include in the synopsis information, including using words which are sort of the no-no or taboo words in an exhibit itself. So in an exhibit, you don't want to say, oh, this is rare or this is scarce. But in your synopsis, you can include information about how rare or how scarce something is. If there is a published census, let's say, of covers, you can say this is one of X number reported in a particular census. Or if there isn't published information, you can say this is one of only so many that I have seen in X years of collecting this material. You can give judges an indication of just how difficult the material is to acquire. Modern material is hard to find. And if I could go to commercial bourses on a regular basis in Brazil, I expect that I would find more of this material. But looking for it in the online auction sites like eBay and Delcamp, which is where most of these covers came from, excepting the one that came out of a dealer box, as I mentioned, that started this whole affair, you just wait patiently until something shows up.
Okay. Question from Steve Rust. If you're exhibiting a stamp and want to show a small feature of the stamp, how much enhancement and magnification would you consider to be reasonable? Now, I would assume that you'd want to show the original example in its actual size, but
Yes,
the enlarged enhancement could be enlarged from 10 to 50 times. And
yes.
the lighting, coloring could be modified a small amount to even help
Mm-hmm.
you make the point. What
Oh,
would be the feelings on that?
well, uh, first thing to do is to make certain that if you use either an enlargement or a reduction, that it comply with whatever the exhibiting requirements are. So APS has in the Manual of Philatelic Judging um, some requirements that enlargements should be at least 125% and reductions should be 75%. And international stamp shows use FIP regulations. The numbers are about the same. Now, if you use an enlargement, could it be larger than 125%? Sure. And how large should it be? As large as is necessary to show the particular feature that to which you want to draw attention. In one of my international exhibits, I show some printing errors or varieties, more correctly, of some overprints, and I have some enlargements where they're circular in nature. So imagine that you drew a circle around the printing variety and then enlarged that. And I either printed on the page or in earlier versions, I took photographs and cut them apart because the scanning capability wasn't as it is today.
Okay, the last question we have is from an anonymous attendee who says, I'm working on a one-frame exhibit on postal history of pre-war covers of King George VI of Hong Kong. Question is, how much would I be penalized in terms of points for judging between covers with a clear CDS against one that is partially clear? I think a quality comparison here.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer without looking at the particular material. And by that I mean that quality comparisons need to be based on what is shown versus what is available. So for modern material, typically there are usages with clear strikes of cancels, but not necessarily. So this is something to communicate in your synopsis page.
Mhm.
If you've been collecting this material for some number of years and you haven't seen a clear cancel, whether the cover was exhibitable in terms of not being dog-eared or bent, folded, stapled, or mutilated, let the judges know, hey, there just aren't floating around clear impressions of this particular cancel. If you don't say anything, the judges assume you don't know, and then they may say, oh, there likely are better cancels, better impressions of the cancel, and correspondingly adjust the points on the condition of the material to reflect that thinking.
All right.
Well,
Well,
let me just say at this time, I think I brought everyone over. If I missed you, please raise your hand. If you decided to stay behind the curtain, so to speak, you still could talk, just unmute yourself and feel free to chat with us. If you are on this side, you probably noticed you had to turn on your camera. It doesn't come on automatically anymore. But and if there's any judges here, I want to thank you very much for all of your service, because it's not an easy job from what I hear.
One comment on the pictures is there's the subtle statement that your enlargement should not be so large that they detract from the philatelic material.
Absolutely.
So that puts an upper limit on the size of the entire picture. It doesn't actually put an upper limit on the, well, it doesn't put as rigorous a limit on the magnification.
And a higher magnification may be necessary if what you're showing is quite small. So a plate flaw, a speck, a blot of ink that should be there, or ink that shouldn't be there, and there's only a small area involved, it may require a high magnification in order for anybody to be able to understand what the actual error or variety is, as well as to locate it on the stamp. As I mentioned in one of my exhibits, I have some images that are circular in nature that blow up and show some printing varieties. And I actually draw an arrow from that enlarged image to the edge of the stamp. Some people draw the arrow right over the mount of the stamp to exactly the point where the particular error or variety is. I haven't yet done that myself, but to draw a person's attention to where to look on the stamp to see what is shown in the enlarged image. That seems to work pretty well.
If I may add, there seems to be some misconception about the enlargements that can appear of material in an exhibit. It is true, as Frederick said, FIP rules say of an original item, not less than 75% or not greater than 125%. But that rule does not apply in the APS Manual of Judging. The APS Manual of Judging says sufficiently larger or smaller so as to distinguish it from the original. As for small blow-ups of the sort of thing that Frederick was talking about, an ink blob or some flaw that you want to know, there is absolutely no limit on the size or the magnification of anything that is shown as an illustration of a part of a postage stamp or cover. No comment. Well, that shot you all down in flames, hasn't it?
Yeah, I've got a 4x6 glossy of a corner of a penny black, which I show in full size along with the penny black in an exhibit where I deliberately break all the exhibiting rules and usually get a silver for it. the picture's way too big, of course, but the other thing is that that exhibit used to be a special study, and now experimental exhibits are in. So I'm going to experiment and enter it as an experimental exhibit if I show it again.
I also think that it should be a very clear distinction between those who exhibit for the joy of collecting gongs and putting nice trophies on the shelves of their study room, and those who, like myself, who've been exhibiting for way over 60 years, who are not interested in gongs or awards, but merely want to show their material and share it with other members of the philatelic fraternity. In my case, I couldn't care rats, you know what, about the exhibiting rules. I do my thing and the way I want to do it. So don't be put off if you just want to share your material. Don't be necessarily bound by rules of exhibiting as in the APS manual.
Like the rules of engagement, right? Carol, let's get to some of the people who've been up there. Carol, you have your hand up there?
Okay. Yes, hi. I noticed, Mr. Lawrence, on your title page, you have a legend down at the bottom with your narrative text and et cetera, et cetera. Is that something new? I've been exhibiting for 20 years and I've never seen that on another exhibit. That's pretty darn cool.
I would like to say it's pretty darn new, but it's really not that new. As I mentioned, the idea of having the separate types of text has been around for a while for
Right.
thematic exhibits, and thematic exhibitors have been identifying the different types of text in their exhibits using a legend somewhere, usually on the title page, sometimes on the plan page, sometimes even on the bottom of the first page of the actual exhibit after the plan page, to make certain that everybody knows what the different type fonts or typefaces are that distinguish the types of text. You do see more and more exhibitors doing that these days, just to make it easier, I think, for everybody, judges and exhibit viewers included, to be able to distinguish the way in which the information is organized and presented in the two types.
Yeah, I think I'll start doing that because I've never seen that before, and maybe it just hasn't hit the West Coast or the Pacific Northwest. Maybe they do that in California. Michael, ever seen that in Portland?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I guess I'm
Many
too busy
times.
to look.
Yeah, no. It's quite a common thing. I personally don't do it. I rely on the pages, the captions to the various items to be sufficiently different in typeface and color to make it obvious. I don't trade it on the front page.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Garfield, welcome, and talk about an experienced person.
Yes, thank you, Joan. Dr. Lawrence, I've made some notes here, and there's 5 things I wanted to cover off very quickly. First of all, is thank you for covering a very interesting subject. I think that the single page exhibit or single frame exhibit is a tough class to go into, but it's a great challenge and an extremely rewarding kind of an exercise. And I'm glad that you've addressed that and are encouraging people. Last summer we had CAPEX here in Toronto, and it was entirely a single frame competition. We had over 400 entrants, and it was a spectacular success. So thank you for promoting the subject. The second point is you talked about the synopsis. I can't underscore the importance of a synopsis. It's your only chance to talk to the judges before the show and to brag about what you've got and to explain why you don't have what you don't have. I think that sometimes people get afraid of exhibiting something because they're afraid that they don't have all the bits and pieces. And in my case, I exhibit the half-cent small queen of Canada, and there's only 5 die proofs. And if you're doing a traditional exhibit, you better have the die proofs. The last one went for $25,000. There's only 5 of them out there. So I just put in my synopsis that I bid on all 5 of them in the last 10 years. I've lost in all cases. I've run out of money. And these things will probably never be on the market again in my lifetime. So, folks, here's the exhibit without the piece. And at least you let the judges know that it's out there. You've done your research, you've done your homework, but you ain't going to see it today. So the synopsis is super important. Third, I wanted to talk you mentioned borders. I think that anybody who puts borders in an exhibit is nuts.
Correct.
And the reason I say that is that, from pure math viewpoint, real estate is so important and critical in single frame exhibiting. And if you use your full 11 by 8.5 page, you've got 1,496 square inches in your entire exhibit. And if you put out just a half-inch border on every page, you cut yourself down to 1,200 square inches, which means you lose 3.1 pages out of the 16. And you've just killed yourself from a real estate viewpoint. You mentioned the 11 by 17s. What I do for the 11 by 17s, I'll just sort of hold this up. This is out of the exhibit that I showed at CAPEX. That is 2 11 by 8.5 inch pages, and I just tape them together. But when you're doing your layout, you plan very carefully where your type is going to be, so the type doesn't go across any of the across the center margin. And it becomes a fairly simple exercise, but now you can do an 11 by 17 without buying a special printer, without going to Staples, and with all that nonsense, you can still do it in the privacy of your own home. And the last thing you mentioned was text and font. I think that, being an old printer from years gone by, I think that text and font is a very careful selection that one should make. It's not going to score you a heck of a lot of points in competition, but in that 5 points at the end of the judge's summation for presentation, I think if you've maxed your font to the period of your exhibit, you may end up getting an extra point, which means you don't use any of the modern sans serif fonts if you're showing material from the 19th century. Just be careful what you're using, and fancy fonts don't generally go very well. Here endeth the sermon. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate your presentation.
Garfield, where would you get information about what fonts were current for for those of us who are not printers and who were not born?
I know you got to be an old fart like me, but if you there are books on the graphic arts, and if you just look at books that were published in a certain time period, just go to your library and look for a book that was published in, if you're doing in Canada the Admiral's issue of 1911 to 1931, go and find a book that was published in 1924 or 1925 and see what kind of a typeface they used. I guarantee you that back in that time period, there are no sans serif fonts. Something like Helvetica didn't come in until about 1975. And suddenly it was the rage, and everybody started to use Helvetica. But Helvetica looks like hell if you're doing a 19th century exhibit.
Correct.
Not a lot of points, but I think if, I'll tell you, I exhibited this half-cent exhibit for 5 consecutive years and got an 84-point Vermeil. And I was short 1 lousy point of that gold medal. And if you can pick up the 1 point by changing your font, good luck to you.
Yeah.
Let me just comment about your fourth comment about the matting and the borders. Here in the U.S. Today, in judging here in the U.S., there is a certain amount of importance, not meaning philatelic importance, that's a separate criterion, the EEF, but there's a certain amount of importance that is placed on identifying the significant items, drawing attention to those items, both as a reflection of philatelic knowledge, as well as to attract exhibit viewers to look at exhibits. So judges do look around to see if important items, significant items are identified, and that there aren't too many identified in each frame, because that's perceived as being an overabundance. So there's like a Goldilocks zone of the number of important items that can or should or could be called out in each frame of an exhibit. But to have an exhibit without an identification in the frames of the significant material is frowned upon these days, at least here in the U.S.
Yeah, I think we're sorry. I believe we're talking about two different types of borders here, Dr. Lawrence. I agree with you wholeheartedly. You've got to identify the key items. I was talking about the borders on the pages as opposed to borders around the particular items.
I'm
Like morning
sorry.
bubbles.
Yes.
Yeah, I hardly endorse putting borders on the material. It's just that becomes optically pleasing, and you can change the color of your border to signify the key items. I'm with you 100% on that one.
Jerry, welcome.
Welcome. Very interesting presentation, Dr. Lawrence. A question was asked earlier, and I forget the exact response was, but it was as regard to who can exhibit and where can they exhibit. Here in Canada, at the regional or a local level, anybody can exhibit. But as soon as you go to the national level or international level, unless something has changed, you have to be a member of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada. So there are some restrictions. No, it's just a comment I'd pass on.
At the Royal Show, you need to be a member of the Royal. At other nationals, you can get away without, because I had a long discussion with an exhibitor from London who can't exhibit this year because he doesn't belong to the Royal, but he had 6 exhibits in last year.
Okay.
And we might mention that the European model, there's not a single model in Europe, but the European models, particularly the model in the UK and the model in Germany, are more detailed and more demanding than the models that are used in the US and Canada. By model, I mean the requirements to enter an exhibit and to move it up. The Germans have a very specific and detailed system. An exhibit starts out at the local or regional level, and it has to perform at a certain level, and then it is permitted to move up to the next higher level of exhibiting, and it has to perform at a higher level at that level. So exhibits move their way up to compete at the national level in Germany. We don't have anything like that here, and I'll share a personal story that might be of interest to those of you who don't have exhibiting experience. This is a do as I say, not as I do or did story. You can, if you wish, start at the very top. You can enter an exhibit in a World Series of Philately show if you have never exhibited before. I don't recommend doing it today, but that's what I did. When I started exhibiting, I put together my first 5-frame exhibit, and I entered it at NAPEX because I was working in the Pentagon. I was still in the Air Force, and I lived in the Washington, D.C. area in suburban Maryland, and wanted to get started in exhibiting. So I put a 5-frame exhibit together, and I entered it at NAPEX. It had never been shown before. I had never exhibited before. it turned out to do quite well in the competition, but again, I wouldn't recommend that you do that today, because exhibiting and judging has changed so much from what it was at that time. But you can do it if you'd like.
Carl, you have your hand up.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Before I ask my question, I just to distinguish between borders and around the pages and highlighting in some way one's important covers. I think borders should be used as a term around the page, and key lines would be thin lines or thicker around the covers that you're trying to indicate are important in some way. And if you use the two different words, I think you very easily distinguish between them, as opposed to there's some people where they're mixed up between using the word border for the same thing, the two different things. Anyway,
I know I was mixed up.
That wasn't my question. You mentioned two. Well, I was going to ask a question about to do with 2 pages or 2 frames, but you then mentioned 2 pages of synopsis. I've always considered that and been told that 1 frame is quite sufficient. I at one stage had 3 pages of a synopsis, and of course nowadays that would just be ridiculous. And I remember our Irish commissioner once telling me, saying, if you're paying $5 for every word you put on a page, you start to become very mean. Now, I think since then, maybe it might be $25, but the point is we need to be succinct in what we're saying, because otherwise the judges are not going to read it. I was even told just a little while ago, because I've just prepared a new prepared a new 5-frame exhibit that's going to Ireland next month. And in that, I was told, get rid of a whole lot of stuff, pare it down. You've got too much to say. They're not going to read it. Put the points that you really need to show. So I was surprised, Frederick, that you talked about 2-page synopsis. So I'd like a comment on that, and then I'll mention the other thing.
Well, there are really two issues or 2 matters here. One is how to write effective text in the exhibit, and parsimony is the name of the game. The higher the level of exhibits at the international level, yes, you do not want to have extraneous text because the judges don't have the time to look at it, won't look at it, even if it's there, and are expecting that you will describe the material, both the storyline and the philatelic material, as succinctly as possible, not in full sentences, but with bullet phrases and that sort of thing. So that's the issue of the density of the text, the amount of the text on the exhibit page. Now, the synopsis, that's a separate issue. The synopsis you prepare in advance and you send forward to the judges, and the judges use it to prepare to evaluate the exhibit when they see it in the frames. The thinking here in the US is that synopses should be about 2 pages. Earlier this year, I judged at a show where I received a synopsis that was 12 or 14 or 16 pages. I was not the first responder, so I didn't feel an obligation to muck my way through it. But I don't think that the exhibitor really thought about the judges in that regard. I think the exhibitor kind of went overboard in terms of the amount of information that was included. So is it limited to 2 pages? No. Could it be 2.5 or 3 pages? Yes. But you may find that the exhibit's chairman at a show may specify that the synopsis should be 2 pages. which could be front and back of a single piece of paper. Why? Because at least up until just recently, all of that material came in paper form and had to be photocopied and then mailed at the printer matted rate out to the judges. Nowadays, more and more of that material is being posted electronically, and the judges can access it off of places like OneDrive or Google Drive or something like that. But
even so, the judges, and I've got an exhibit that's just coming back from the States very soon. It's been out there this year, a one frame. But even so, judges get the synopsis for every exhibit, have to go through all that supposedly, and one of the better, higher known judges said to me, the smaller amount, the better, because in your synopsis, because the judges don't even have the time to read all of that and do the research that they're supposed to be doing for it. It's a tough situation. Can I mention this other subject, by the way, which is that this exhibit that's been in the States, I've got it from Vermeil up to a gold. I'm hoping to maybe tweak it a little past where it is at the moment. I've been criticized because it's quite full, but the topic is very limited. And it was suggested, you should make this into a two-frame exhibit. Well, in my view, a two-frame exhibit is just a piece of rubbish because it's not a one frame, and two frames is like nothing. It needs to be, in my opinion, at least 3 frames to make it into something. And if I was to do that with that exhibit, which I explain in my synopsis, that there isn't a lot of material, and I've been collecting it for 35 years, and this is all you got. If I did 2 frames, it would just be silly because half of the second frame would be padding. So I'm interested in that sort of comment about, that sort of problem.
Well, if your single frame exhibit doesn't fit in 16 pages, then maybe you better change the title of your exhibit or change the purpose of the exhibit and just hone it down a little bit.
It does fit, but it's crowded. It's full, but it's not. I don't think it's too full. Some judges think it's too full.
Full is good. Full is good.
Well, let me mention a technique which has gained some popularity and traction here in the U.S. that you might consider.
Windowing.
And that is writing some supplemental information and parking it somewhere on the internet, on a OneDrive or Google Drive or something like that. Then generating a QRC, a quick response code, to take people to that site. And then you put the QRC code on the title page of the exhibit. So the exhibitor, if he or she is interested in more information about the topic, can just use his or her smartphone, click on the QRC, and it opens up the supplemental information. The exhibitor is right there looking at your exhibit and then is reading on his or her smartphone the supplemental information. If there's just so much information that you feel that's necessary in order for people to really understand, you might try that. Now, I've not done that myself, but there are some exhibitors who have used that particular technique. There are a couple of articles written by Pat Walker in the TPE, the Philatelic Exhibitor of the AAPE, about mechanically how to do that, and then in terms of how to effectively break apart the information that you present in the exhibit and what you put in the supplemental resource so that it works as well as possible in terms of the judges seeing what they need and want to see, and the exhibit viewer then having access to the information that you want him or her to have access to. So you might try that.
I did something which I'm trying out. Sorry, this is the last thing, which I'm trying out with this 5-frame exhibit. And that is, I discovered that it was, it's quite useful to tell the judges where your sources are, whether they're at the American Philatelic Research Library or whatever. What I did instead was to assemble all these things into one document, and on my synopsis, put a link to that document that they can download all that stuff directly, read it, not have to go rushing around to get the source material to read it.
And
It's just an idea. We'll see how good it comes. Thank you very much. I've taken up too much time.
Oh, no,
Now-
thank you, Carl. It's really helpful to hear your experiences.
Thank you.
Alex Walker, thank you for joining us.
Welcome, Alex.
Hi, Alex.
Trying to unmute. I have unmuted. A few comments here. I've exhibited a five-framer to large Vermeil level international. It's what we call the open class. I started
Yes.
off and I was delighted with the open class because it allows you to have all sorts of ephemera.
Mm-hmm.
And the trouble with ephemera is some of it's pretty big. So I have had no hesitation in going to what we call A3 size, which is your 1117, you Americans call it, isn't it? You North Americans call it. I have these A3 pages. I had them cut at a printer store, and I have the plastic binders that hold them, and I can put in great big enormous bits. And that overcomes the problem of having vertical covers. I criticize your vertical covers. I didn't like them. I know you're restricted by the size of your page, but if you go to A3, you can get in large covers in horizontal format. Oh yeah, you Americans just love acronyms, don't you?
I'm sure we do. Yes.
SVC you had. SVC on one of the covers.
Yes.
And I think it's probably Sin Valor Comercial. Sin Valor Comercial.
So no commercial value. No
value.
commercial value or no cash value, perhaps.
No commercial value. I think that's what it is. Yep.
Thank you, Alex.
That's it. Okay.
Well,
Thank you. I appreciate
Where-
your sharing.
Where are you from, Alex?
Aberdeen, Scotland.
Oh my gosh, well, thank you for staying up so late.
Yeah, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm now heading.
Another
But
fellow
it's-
member.
Almost time for a glass of scotch, Alex.
I've just had a beer. I'm going to have a glass of scotch. I see my friend Terry Woods from Scotland up there in the corner. Hiya, Terry. How are you doing?
Not bad. That's a half a grouse I've got there.
Oh my God.
You're back to the woods in a week's time. I'm going to.
That's right.
Yes. All right. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. Tony Ward, thank you.
Yes, welcome. Look, I've still got a bit of a hang up about all of these percentages for illustrations. I think that in the old days, they used to, because people used to photostat the various cancellations or cachets which they wanted then to show, or back stamps or whatever on their displays. I can understand the need to have them at a slightly different size so that, you know, they weren't then becoming on the market as, oh, look at this cachet, but really it was just a photostat. But nowadays, particularly when the actual illustration is being printed on the page that is being displayed, I don't think there should be that restriction at all. I feel that it is quite a, you know, why not have things at the actual size? I mean, the rules need to be regulated so that they can be shown at the proper size. That'd be one way around this, I think. I think it's a wonderful doing this actual discussion tonight, because it may get some more people in and doing some exhibits. It's nothing like doing something that you like, and yet it's no, it's a good thing to do. Good thing. But thank you very much.
Tony, as Michael Dixon mentioned a little earlier, the percentages at the international level are set in the rules. So that's the FIP. And FIP regulations set the 75 and 125 percent limits. The idea is that something on an exhibit page not be confused with legitimate or real philatelic material. So if the image of the entire front or entire back of a cover is shown because the actual back or front of the cover is what is displayed as the original philatelic material, the image is not mistaken as being other original philatelic material. Here in the U.S., we don't have those numbers and those numbers in hard fast regulation. As he said, it's so that the size doesn't detract from the original material. But if you object to the numbers at the international level, your national philatelic organization has a representative to the FIP, and the official channel there is to let your national organization know that you would like your national organization's representative to the FIP to communicate that your national organization would like to see that there's an adjustment to any rule or regulation that the FIP puts out. And FIP regulations are enormous. There are two kinds. There are GREVs, general regulations for evaluation, and SHREVs, special regulations for evaluation. So you're looking at cookbook-like stacks of paper if you were to print out the GREVs and the SHREVs for the FIP for any particular exhibit class. And then you move to the next class and there's another stack of paper.
Yes, the point is taken. I just mean though that if they can't tell the difference between something which is printed on the page and which is there as some other means, well then that causes a little bit of concern.
I tend to agree with you, and that's perhaps why we don't have numbers in the APS manual of philatelic judging today, but FIP still has those numbers.
Actually, in my exhibits, Frederick, I always, for the national level, I always put postmark at 136% or whatever percentage I've used, or cover at 25%, so that there's absolutely no mistake in the caption to the illustration.
In some of my exhibits, I have the word image with square brackets around it. I haven't put the percentage, but one of my exhibits, I have some 100% size images of the other side of a stamp. And I indicate under the image in brackets the word image, so that it's clear that this is the other side of that particular stamp.
Francois, I'm sorry.
Francois.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the great presentation. Two quick questions. I have never exhibited, but extremely interested in doing so, in collecting like many of you for many, many years. One comment is for Garfield, and another comment is for a white page selection on what to exhibit, basically. So to start with Garfield, what's the advantage of using an 1117 frame or page like you presented earlier on versus 2 8x11?
Well, I use a pair of 8.5 by 11s, and the advantage is that I can show an item that's 15 inches long on a 17-inch page. That's a really key piece, top of two sheets, and so I've got to get a wide page. But being a tightwad, I'm not going to buy a printer that holds 11 by 17 to do one page. And I got lots of 8.5 by 11 paper in my inventory here. So I just designed that my type does not overlap any of the the center. Just takes a little bit of planning, but saves a whole lot of money doing it that way.
So if you start with 1117 pages, do you have to do the whole one page on the same format?
No, no, not this, but the 11 by 17 format allows you to do things that you cannot do on an 8.5 11. For example, if you're doing postal history, you've got number 10 envelopes. As we've seen, there's only one way to put them on an 8.5 by 11, and that's vertically. And judges don't like that. I have an exhibit of the use of the 1 cent stamp in Canada, and I've got 5 number 10 envelopes. But so I made an 11 by 17 page, and they all fit on that one 2-page format.
Okay.
So it's just a case of taking advantage of the real estate that's available to you in a frame. And if you really needed to, you could probably get 4 pages hung together and do an 11 by 34, and it would still fit on the one row of the frame, and you could put all kinds of wilds.
Yeah, like larger
This
stuff.
size registered envelope is another thing that, it's about 12 inches and it doesn't even fit sideways on an A4 page, much less an 8.5 11, so that's where the double page, but where you place them, if you've got single pages and some double pages, if you place your double, if it works like that, in the middle, it doesn't look stupid. Whereas if you put a double page here and then the double page out at the bottom, it could look a bit silly. You've got to organize, but it's hard. If you mix and match.
Yeah.
The other piece of
Sorry, gentlemen. I was just going to add, in recent years, largely because of deteriorating eyesight, I have abandoned stamp collecting, and I now collect picture postcards, which is a category in the US philatelic world. And I only now, I don't know how you can see this, but I only now ever use 11 by 17. I don't have any smaller size sheets. It's readily available. You don't have to go to anywhere to have them cut. There are many suppliers of lightweight and card weight for pages, paper, and for postcards, so as not to, you can mount postcards quite easily with overlapping, but you don't want to do that if possible. And I think the same holds true of covers, which I used to display. And you're much better off with 11 by 17. And 11 by 17 printers here are around about 110, 125 bucks. No big deal.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. My other question to the panelists is, I've been to Capex 22, like Garfield. It was a wonderful exhibition. It really got me into wanting to do this 1-page frame exhibition, but I just don't know where to start. I just don't know what subject to tackle. And I have to admit, I have a lot of material, a lot of thematics, but I just don't know which one to choose,
If I can jump in on that one, Francois, one of the things I very strongly recommend when I talk to the members of our West Toronto Stamp Club is, if you're thinking of doing an exhibit, grab something that really turns your crank. If you like something, that's what you want to do. Don't try doing something that doesn't really float your boat. Take something you really love, and if you love it, share it with everybody else. Go for it.
Now, Garth, are there any resources in Canada that could serve as a mentor for people starting out who need direction?
Yeah, here's a quick plug. If you go to the West Toronto Stamp Club website, which is www.westtorontostampclub.org, We have a series of online presentations that we do, and one of them is called the Learning Workshop. And we've recorded presentations for the last 2 years, and there's been a lot of dribs and drabs of exhibiting material shown there. And you're more than well. It's free access for anybody, anytime, anyhow. Download the thing, snatch the photographs or whatever, and my email address is there. If you need help, give me a call. I'm delighted to help.
Could you say that website address again?
Yeah, it's just West Toronto Stamp Club, all shown as one word, .org, O-R-G.
Okay, great, thanks.
We have the AAPE also. I'm not sure if we reach out to Canada. Someone might. I know we have a lot of Canadians. Does the AAPE reach to Canada?
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah.
It used
Oh, yeah,
to have an
we're
officer
not
who
that
collected
foreign.
dues
Come
in
on,
Canadian
Joan.
dollars.
Where are we?
May I ask a last question? It's an ethic question. During a show like Capex 22 we had in Toronto recently, is it okay to photograph a one-frame exhibition from somebody else?
Yep, absolutely.
Garfield, you mentioned the West Toronto Stamp Club website with a lot of information, for example, the learning workshop and whatnot. I don't recall the PSSC website address offhand, but the Philatelic Specialist Society of Canada also has a lot of presentations that are available for public viewing, both of exhibits and presentations in general.
Yeah, you're right, Jerry. I think there's 86 presentations on there right now, as I recall.
Yeah, I think, actually, I think it's higher because I just wrote a little article. I think the address is pssc.org, I think, or .com. I can't remember.
I'm just looking it up right now.
Yeah.
There you go. It's in the chat.
RPSC Canada.
No, not the RPSC. The
Is that the one?
Philatelic Specialist Society.
Okay.
Is that the one I put in the chat? Done. Thank you very much for being so patient. I love your background. Let's unmute you here. There we go. Oh, sorry. I think you muted again.
There, that's better. Yeah. Francois, just a comment here before I get into something else here. What you have to do if you're going to do an exhibit, you have to look at what material you have, like Garfield said, what you like, what you want to do. If you want to talk about birds, you'll have 28 frames. If you want to talk about robins in Quebec or Ontario or Northern Canada, that is more condensed. Maybe, I guess what I'm saying is that if you're doing a single frame or 5 frame, anything, okay, it's like a book. You open it up, there's chapter 1 and there's the last chapter. You have to have the story. It has to have a beginning and an end. Now, getting back to, I have an exhibit that's postcard related, World War I, first year of conflict from the Canadian Expeditionary Force going over in September, October of 14 for 1 year. Now the postcards are related to a soldier who was at the front at the Somme and Flanders and was communicating with his family in the UK. He was on the Canadian soldier because he was an immigrant to Canada at the time of the war. So suffice it to say, I would like to put this now. Also, from the standpoint, from those postcards, I have the front shown the backside shown, which is the man, the soldier writing back to his daughter, his wife, and so on and so forth. So a bit of social philately. Along with that, all the postcards that have censor marks on it, those are detailed. And also detailed roughly in the synopsis about the military postal system, which was very effective. Thousands, probably had 10,000 soldiers involved in postal, mostly to get parcels from the UK to the front lines and so on and so forth. And being postcards, of course, at that time in the 1900 to 1920, there's probably 100 million postcards mailed every day. So on that basis, I'd like to do an experimental class. Now the APS, this has maybe 2 or 3 or 5 little lines there. So if I cover all of the and the postcards, I have identified where I can the provenance, the printing, and the tinting of the postcards, and so on and so forth. So I cover postcards as a social philately, the soldier communicating with his family, the censor marks, the postcards where they were manufactured, how they were gotten by the guy. Like silk postcards probably cost a soldier 3 or 4 times what a regular postcard. Does that qualify for an experimental class? I don't know.
Postcard class.
Well, okay. But could it be an experimental class?
Why experimental?
Because it's a
class.
crossover between multiple classes, and it may get killed in any single class, depending on the opinion of whether your judges say, well, it is postcards, but, and they sort of tolerate the extras, or whether they say, no, it's got elements of these too, and experimental is the right place for it. And your jury will put it where it does best.
Yeah.
If that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that comment. It's done reasonably well from the standpoint of postcard class. But I just like to, and the synopsis, I would think on an experimental, I've got 2 pages, a lot of reference and research into the postcards, where the battalion was at any particular time. All the postcards, by the way, have a pencil date, and through battle records, which are here in Toronto for that regiment, I have detailed on the exhibit where they all are, where they were on that particular date.
The one thing that may make it experimental is that if you've tracked where the markings, which did not move with the regiments, because that gave Germans intelligence, so that the hammers moved separately from the units that they originally belonged to. No, if you get told, well, that's not a postcard exhibit, that's why there's an experimental class, and you need to say, no, it's postcards, it's military markophily, and it's social philately. Therefore, it's experimental because it's all of the above, and therefore not singly any of the above.
Yeah. No, I just appreciate those comments, because I'd like to put it in as experimental class. Thank you.
Terrence. I'm sorry.
Can Yvonne talk?
Yes.
I have the same issues. I have not exhibited. I think I would like to kind of dive into there. But what I would like to talk about is a particular folded cover, or 3 particular folded covers that may have gone from Haiti to France in the 1860s. But I don't want to have to tell everybody about ship, I want to say it went on this ship, on this route, but not concentrate on educating anyone about the ship. It's about particular people riding back to France at a particular time. So it covers other issues, but how do you delineate down to, without having to get a Ph.D. written down in there about the ship it took, or
I think once you name the ship, Yvonne, you don't have to do anything else. You say it went from here to there on the good ship Lollipop.
So when you were doing that, your synopsis or your topic is about a particular letter or folded letter, or letter 3 maybe, going over to France at a particular time, which is also at the time of the Civil War. So we're not really sure what diversions happened on the shipping route yet. I don't know yet. But so just don't get into all that. Just get
that's
in.
a story for another day.
Right. A day when I know what I'm doing. I just want to jump in, like you're saying, that if I did a one frame exhibit to learn how to do it, but also to share the idea of individuals on the other side of the country trying to get a letter from one place to the next over across an ocean in that time period is means it's a pretty significant letter no matter who wrote it. What is significant in that the travel it had to take was that it got there is amazing in itself.
One of the difficulties you may have with that, Yvonne, is there enough material to fill 16 pages?
I don't know.
Maybe it's more deserving of an article in one of the club journals, like the American Philatelist, or whatever.
Well, I'm a board member of KT Philatelic Society, so I thought, eventually I'll put an article in and begin talking as an article on a particular cover.
So there's a sheet.
But the idea is that it's gotten so complicated to do exhibits that you almost have to have a PhD in the subject to even jump in at a beginner level,
Yvonne, just a point of experience here. I wrote an article. I was asked to do a favorite cover, if you will, for the APS for an issue they were doing just recently on Canada. And so I wrote up a kind of a neat cover, too small for any kind of an exhibit, but I got 3 pages in the APS journal, and the feedback that I have got from other people in the APS on that particular cover is wonderful. It's added to my knowledge of the cover, the end of the subject. So if you write it up in a journal, there's a good chance that somebody's going to come out and say, "Hey, I got some stuff that'll help you," and you might accumulate enough for a full frame exhibit.
Good thought.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the great input. Terrence, you have been so patient. I want to thank you so much.
Well, most people call me Terry, as Alec Walker said earlier there. I'm from Scotland, just the same as Alec. Alec, by the way, is gone, but Alec is actually the president of the Association of Scottish Philatelic Societies. So, in effect, is my boss. And I'm one of the judges in Scotland, as well as having exhibited. Now, I've been sitting here that long, I can't remember what I wanted to say. It must be about 1:30 or something like that now. But I must admit, I did want to see this webinar because I'm in favor of exhibiting. And one of the things that is always confusing for stamp collectors and club members as we have, is the differentiation between exhibiting and showing your collection off at the stamp club. There is a difference there. And if you do wish to partake of the haughty level of international exhibiting, or even national exhibiting or federation exhibiting, well, there are rules that you have to adhere to. And these are usually available prior to you getting your entrance form or filling it in online, telling you what to do. So if you do wish to exhibit and you've never done it before, I would advise you to do that. First of all, read the rules. Many people here in Scotland just can't get around that there are rules to exhibiting. And I must admit, I have fallen foul to it myself over the last 50 years. But I must admit, I do enjoy exhibiting, although it's been 2 or 3 years now since I have done. But the one thing that I do find is I collect Scottish postal history, by the way, which is a part of British postal history, obviously. So it's a wee bit parochial, shall we say. But collecting and exhibiting, I must admit, I do enjoy it. And the thing is, the reason that I get into doing the judging courses here in Britain was to enable me to be better at the exhibiting, putting together the collection and putting it onto the paper and showing it off. And that's really what it is. Just do what you want to. You collect, show what you collect. That's all you can do. But look at the rules first. Follow them. But the one thing that I've often advised collectors to do is when they put their collection together, you have a title that you think it might be, but once you've got it all there, look at it and then make your title what you've got there. You don't say Scottish postal history. You say Scottish postal history from 1660 to 1760. No, that's it. But I must admit, I have done one frame exhibits myself, and we do encourage first-time exhibitors here in Scotland to contribute one frame. And tomorrow night, when I go to the meeting at my local society here in Hamilton, Scotland, I will be encouraging our members to think about exhibiting at Congress next April. A long time away, but that's when you've got to think about it. You don't think about it like 2 weeks before the event. You've got to think about it a year before. That's another thing I would say. But I've enjoyed tonight. It's the first time that I've spoken because it's the first time I've actually known anything about what's been talked about.
Oh, thank you. I think if we have more of these type of webinars to help people who haven't exhibited before and to speak to judges and experienced collectors, I think it will help. It will help people get over that intimidation. Like Yvonne said, you're like, when you're going into it, you're like, oh my God, I have to have a PhD to put together an exhibit. And then someone talks you off the ledge. You know, you get the judges or experienced collectors and they say, no, you know, you could do kitty cats on stamps and you'll do okay.
That's it.
Can I have a question? I have something here that I'd like to exhibit and I have no idea how to do it. It's a printing plate used for one of the postcards on my postal stationery exhibit, but it's on a wooden block.
too thick to go in a frame, I believe.
I think it might be too thick.
Yeah, it's about,
Some people have hung three-dimensional items off the frames, but you need to make sure that it's somehow secured in a way that it's not going to grow feet and walk, which obviously would be a concern for you.
I mean,
Could
this
you
is
take an image of it? Could you take? Could he use
Yeah.
a picture of it?
Yep.
So, Frederick, you've been quiet there.
It's a little over 2 centimeters thick, so about an inch.
That's something that you would have to tell the organizers of the event. You would have to see about that, whether they could accept that or not.
Okay.
That would be down to them rather than whether it would fit the frames or not. It certainly won't fit the frames. It won't go behind the perspex of the glass.
No.
But you would have to see the organizer about that.
I've heard two things. One show I was at had an exhibit of three-dimensional material from a stalwart worker at that show, and they allowed him to put it in horizontal cases. The other one I've heard of someone who had their own sheet of perspex made specially. You need to know where the piece is, and a special piece of perspex with the hole cut, and then sides and another front. And you need to get permission from the show for that too.
Clever, very clever.
Where there's a will, there's a way, or an inheritance and thousands of lawyers.
That's right. You need your own plane and your big box to put it in.
A few years ago, there was an exhibit of match and medicine stamps on original documents, and the exhibitor built a special A-frame. So basically took two of the Ameripex original style frames, connected them at the top, and then arranged them kind of like a tripod like this, and then put shelves and put all of the items on the shelves. Now, obviously, the collector had to pay for the cost of that specially manufactured frame and had to arrange for the exhibits committee to accept it and had to transport it to and from the shows. But that certainly was an effective way to show off all of the original material. So seeing these match and medicine stamps on original entities, so they're not on documents, but they were on bottles of patent medicine and matchboxes and decks of cards and such. Now, I did want to make one comment going back to the discussion about mixing 8.5 by 11 and other size pages. So if you had one or more, say 11 by 17 pages, and then the rest 8.5 by 11, absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. And if you take your own exhibit to the show, and particularly if you mount your own material, then everything will go just fine. But if you ship an exhibit to a show to be mounted by the show committee, then any time that you have something that's an odd size or an odd arrangement, you run the risk that it's not going to end up in the frames that the way that you wanted. So if you ship, let's say 11 by 17 pages, my suggestion would be make the entire exhibit 11 by 17 pages, and they all fit in the same way in a box, a FedEx box or a UPS box, to send the exhibit to the show. When they come out of the box, they all look alike, and the folks who put the pages up in the frames can easily follow, oh, this is number 1 and this is number 2, and that's the first row in the frame, and 3 and 4 in the next row. When you start mixing start mixing the sizes like apples and oranges, again, you run the risk of the pages ending up in ways that you had not intended in the frames. It's difficult enough when the pages are all the same size that the pages sometimes get confused. As I've been a judge before at shows where we've gone through an exhibit and we've recognized that there are one or more pages that are out of order. They just got put into the frames improperly or incorrectly by the volunteers who put the material into the frames. And we try not to fault the exhibitor for that. But here the pages were the same size, 8.5 by 11, and they're all numbered, and they came out of the box in order, and yet they ended up on the frames in a shuffled order. It's just human nature. Accidents happen. People aren't careful, especially when the volunteers are at stamp shows are not necessarily exhibitors themselves. And so don't think about these things. And to them, the order of pages coming out of a box and being placed in the frames is not something that they're familiar with. And correspondingly, accidents happen.
Dr. Lawrence, thank you very much for the presentation. And
my pleasure.
And thank you, Joan and Robert, for hosting it again. And I look forward to the upcoming programs that you have. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Garfield, you had something you wanted to say there.
Yeah, I just want to add something to what Terry was talking about with rules within the exhibitions. And we at the West Toronto Stamp Club is a bunch of unruly people, I guess, led by me, and somewhat irreverent. And one of our guidelines is that rules were made for the obedience of fools and the guidance of wise people. So for our annual club competition, we've always had a single page competition and a formal single frame competition. But to encourage people to exhibit, we have an anything goes class, and you're allowed to put in anything that's 2 pages to 15 pages. You do not have to meet any rules, any regulations. If you've got a 7-pager, it fits, and it's judged not on the standards of the normal exhibits, but judged on a popular vote of those present at the meeting. And that has been a very successful competition. The guy that won it 3 years ago was a brand new exhibitor, and he came in with he's to have a shot at it, and he's now exhibiting the same exhibit nationally, having won the award and got encouraged and just picked up the ball, and he's running with it. So for any club, think about having a competition where there are no rules.
I was going to leave, and then I saw Garfield ready to talk about the West Toronto Stamp Club. And as a member of that club, I decided to wait till he'd finished talking. We'll see you, Garfield. And,
thanks, Jerry. We'll catch you later on, pal.
Garfield, you made me move to Toronto from Montreal here.
Well, hey, funnily enough, again, we're bragging a bit here, but the West Toronto's been strange enough that we went online with our two meetings a month back at the beginning of COVID. And as a result, our club membership has grown from 89 to about 130. And we do have members. We got 5 members in the US. We got them in every province in Canada. And we do have one in Antigua and one in England. So for a local stamp club, we're not doing all that badly. So anybody who wishes to join us, you're more than welcome. We'd love to have you on board. Or just send your name to me. We put you on the guest list and you join for free.
Good up, Garfield.
John, I've got a quick comment for you that you may not have shared with people. Tonight, there are a lot of web page links given in the chat. And what many people may not know, that right at the bottom, there are 3 little buttons, one of them with 3 little dots. And if you click on it, you can save the chat. And therefore, you say, what was that website that Joan showed us? I've forgotten, and it's over. they can save the chat. You might mention at the beginning that if there's a whole lot of links like you did tonight, that they can actually save the chat to their computer, and then they're not going to lose it and say, whatever. Just an idea.
You talk to them. So yes, that's a very good point, Carl. I will bring that up to people.
I don't like to criticize the people who run these things, I prefer the judges to criticize me.
No. Anything to make it better. I think that's,
Good.
Sorry, Carl, where are those three buttons?
Where am I got? When you click on the chat and it opens up the chat in front of the attendees, where it says type a message, there's a little page, there's a little happy face, and there are three little dots.
Fantastic. I got it. Thank you. That's
Bottom
magic.
corner.
Where does it save it to?
Where does it? That depends on that depends on your computer. Where it'll probably. Let me just do this here.
It should go to your downloads.
Downloads. I expect.
Mine is going to the Finder, but I'm using a Mac, so I know what I'm doing. With Windows, it gets lost into wherever. I don't know. It's just an idea.
Probably goes into downloads.
Especially tonight, where there were so many. There must have been 5 or 6 different organizations' websites put up, and unless you've written it down and then missed part of the show, whatever.
Is this presentation going to be saved to the website?
Yes, it will. So what mine does anyways, mine goes into the documents folder and creates a Zoom folder, and it saves it inside the Zoom folder.
What I've been doing is taking a picture of that frame with my.
I will be a little bit more diligent about putting up all these links that we mentioned in the talk on the now that YouTube allows you to post them. We'll go ahead and put them in the videos.
I gotta go. It's 2:45 here. I'm in France, so good night. Mike might be tired as well, but he's just got
Carl.
Frederick, this was outstanding. Thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, everyone, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you all.
And I just want to remind everyone at the APS talk that Frederick is having in a few next week or the week after, the 21st. It's in the chat there about researching Uncover, which should be pretty interesting also.
It's the 26th, September the 26th. It's the next APS stamp chat.
Terrific. And if anyone misses that, we'll send out that link. It will be in the reminder. Hi, Mike. You look tired.
Well, I am tired because I was up at 4 o'clock in order to get ready for your meeting at 5. It's now 7:45 here. I've had my breakfast. I've enjoyed the meeting. I feel that Frederick did a grand job of thoroughly regurgitating his academic abilities in detailing totally thoroughly everything to do with the aspect of exhibiting. I don't exhibit other than on my website, which is evolving all of the time. I know little, but thanks to Frederick, a bit more about exhibiting. It won't encourage me to exhibit. However, I would not put anybody off from doing it because it's an educational journey. So people need to do what they want to do, how they want to do it. And Garfield has highlighted the facts that there are rules, but in some quarters they are quite liberal. But what I've observed during this morning's episode is that there is no constant. It seems that the USA have got their own set of rules, their own sizes of paper, their own thoughts. Other parts of the world have got different rules, and dependent on where a person is going to exhibit depends on what rules they have to follow.
It's a big difference.
Why can't everything be standardized and basically follow the FIP rules so that everybody in the world has got a constant to go by? I don't know whether that's practical or not, but it's just my own observations.
Mike, there was a funny one about that last year at CAPEX. I wasn't on the committee, but Ted Nixon, the chairman of the Green Foundation, was in the bin room. And one of the things that nobody thought about with the initial planning was all the frames were designed for 11 by 8.5 inch pages. And then when the exhibits came in from Europe, they're on A4 pages and they don't fit. So we had to do some very serious and rapid reshuffling of the frame layouts to get all the A4s into a certain type of frame. So they all went into, all the A4s went to a separate room. But it was an interesting exercise, and it just proved the very point you were making, is that there are no standardized rules across the world.
And there should be, because philately in its general form is global.
We thought of cutting the top off the A4 pages.
It was
well, that would work, but the width that is a little bit problematical.
Oh, so then you have bisects, right?
That's right. Yeah. Rules are made for the obedience of fools and the guidance of wise people.
On the top of your 11 by 17 sheet, Garfield, that would have looked very good.
Had they cut in, a cut would have been cruel in that one.
Well, Frederick, this is fantastic.
We have CAPEX stories from one of the third or fourth one of one of the commissioners who was there and he was given a special volunteer to help him mount one exhibit that was on oversight. They weren't even A4 paper, they were bigger than that. And he was told, hang on, get everything else up. We'll give you someone to mount that after he's done with the people he's helping now. And that worked quite well. The American commissioners got people who knew the CAPEX frames in the one room.
Yes, but you shouldn't have to make do and mend at a exhibition of that prestige. You shouldn't have to do it. If everything were standardized,
if frames would hold either size pages, it would work. You're not going to get the Americans to start using metric paper.
Well,
metric system.
Okay, this is good. We're not going to go with this.
Or vice versa.
Yeah, my rules, right? We should have all the same rules, just mine, right? So.
Well, you know, we're on metric here in Canada, and yet we still talk about 8.5 by 11 pages.
Yeah, right.
Ontario Hydro and AECL used to use metric paper, and the Auditor General said it was expensive.
Well, the problem is that metric paper doesn't fit in imperial size file cabinets.
Yeah, well, that's why I've got a lot of excess Ontario Hydro A4 binders for my British journals, and I did manage to find someone who was throwing out an A4 hole punch, so I've got the hole punch. And the binders cost me 25 cents each from Hydro Surplus, if they got that far.
Well, let's be fair about it. Any change will always cause teething problems. So my suggestion of standardization is probably absolute poppycock, because, as was pointed out, the US aren't going to change, Europe aren't going to change, and if ever it did, then it's going to cause turmoil initially. So perhaps it is better to leave everything as it is. I can look at my own exhibit on my website anytime I want and see it changing. And on that sort of subject, I got your catalogue the other day, Joan.
Oh, you did. I mailed it to you because I like you.
Oh, thank you.
You don't have to buy anything. I just wanted you to see it.
Well, I was very, very impressed with the
cartoons.
No, not the cartoon. The range of material, and particularly the US dollar values on cover. Finding those is tough, but you've got pages of them.
Well, it was one collector, but the $5 is really interesting. And this is the bad thing about doing philatelic auctions, is like you just want to buy it and keep it. And my husband will just, like, if we had a rope, he'd just hang me right now.
That I can't go.
That I want to keep a lot of things we're selling, and you'll just yell at me. But they're consigners, so you have to put them up, and if you buy them in, that doesn't make sense.
Are you willing to pay him the commission?
The other thing I noticed was part of Edward Klemke's seahorses, which I've known Edward for many, many, many years. And I don't know where all his stuff's gone. He had a lot of collections. I don't know where it is. Isabel, his daughter, seems to have taken over the reins of dealing with all of the material. But she's very close-chested about what her intentions are.
I'm not sure who. I'd have to ask Keith about who the consigner was on that. I think there's a couple consigners, but the seahorses are amazing. I thought they were so pretty.
Well, certainly. I think there's one, perhaps two. World War One, 2 and 6 issues, which maybe I can use. So I've got to look and see. There is some very, very nice and unusual material in there. It was a pleasure to look at, and I'm still looking. I've marked some pages and decided that if ever I've got any money, I'll be putting some bids in.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we have fun doing it. But anyway, Frederick, any parting words? Because Keith has already started dinner without me. That's how
I've finished.
he finished dinner without me.
Yes, look, I'd like to thank Frederick for initiating this discussion tonight too. It's very pleasing, and to all of the various folk, it's excellent, and particularly to Joan and Robert for making these things possible.
And again, I'd like to thank the ESG for inviting me to fill in tonight. George Holschauer, who was originally scheduled to be here tonight, has shoes that no one can fill. So please don't think of me as being a fill-in. Fortunately, he will be with us next month. So those of you who came expecting to speak with George, please come back next month and don't tell him that you were that disappointed that I was here in his stead.
No way.
We have been good friends for many, many years, and I'd like to keep that friendship intact.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's been a great night.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Frederick. You're fantastic.
Thanks, Frederick. That was wonderful.
Again, my pleasure.